this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. We have an incredible program lined up for you today. Our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera and our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz are going to be joining me in just a little bit to talk about a whole multitude of different subjects that have to do with the border. But as always, we're going to start today's edition with a look at what's trending across the border, starting with a federal judge in Chicago has issued an extensive injunction restricting federal agents' use of force, saying Thursday that a top Border Patrol official leading an immigration crackdown has repeatedly lied about threats posed by protesters and media. The preliminary injunction came in response to a lawsuit alleging that federal agents have used excessive force in their immigration crackdown in the Chicago area. The order restricts agents from using certain riot control weapons such as tear gas and pepper balls. Those now can only be used to prevent a, quote, immediate threat. It also bars agents from using physical force, including shoving protesters and journalists to the ground, and it also requires agents to give 2 warnings before using riot control weapons. Moving over to California, Fresno State, which is in Central California, is one of the first universities to implement an ICE alert for students and staff. It's a new law called the SAFE Act, and it was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom back in September. So what that means is now universities are implementing its procedures for how it will comply with the new law. The school will send emails, post website banners, and social media notices if there are confirmed immigration enforcement actions happening on campus. The school says they'll only use the text alert system for emergencies. And take a look at this. An ICE agent who has been accused of drunk driving while off the clock in Chicago's western suburbs. That is Guillermo Diaz Torres, who is 33 from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he was arrested last month. Now, police say this ICE agent fell asleep at the wheel of his car, and when they knocked on his window to wake him up, he allegedly slammed on the gas, jumped a curb, and landed in those shrubs that you see there on your screen with that SUV. When police started questioning him, he told them that he had worked an 18-hour shift at an ICE detention center and was headed back to his hotel room. Specifically, that ICE detention center in question is the Broadview facility, which has been under scrutiny, as we just discussed, up in the Chicago area. Police say he failed a series of sobriety tests, including balancing, walking a straight line, and reciting the alphabet. He apparently also refused to take a breathalyzer test at that crash scene. The agent was sent to Chicago to take part in the Trump administration's immigration enforcement effort that repeatedly has said drunk driving is reason enough for immigrants in the U.S. illegally to be detained and deported. Time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, to talk about something that he's been following today. Julian, can you fill us in?
Rudy, hi. Good to be back here on the show. Yes, let me tell you, every year the Center for U.S.-Mexico of Rice University's Baker Institute puts out a report on what to expect in the U.S.-Mexico relationship in the coming year. It is a very comprehensive report that takes a long time to craft. It involves consulting experts in the fields of economics, politics, society, and see where our relationship is headed in the next year. I can tell you that the report, which was presented yesterday online, is not very doesn't have very good prospects for Mexico in the coming year, and it's primarily due to 2 factors. One has to do with politics, obviously, but the other one, the one that we centered on covering, is economics. Uh, the uh, the forecast for the Mexican economic outlook, especially for those Americans and American companies that are thinking of investing in Mexico or have investments in Mexico, is complicated. The country is not growing. It's not growing at all. And also, it has started the administration of President Sheinbaum has started has continued a very aggressive new social welfare program that, according to scholars, is draining a lot of the budget. Some of the estimates that this social program called Bienestar, which includes a whole range of things, including cash payments to the elderly, cash payments to certain young people, and also to certain women and certain with certain needs. So this program could be draining up to a quarter of the Mexican government spending. In addition, the country is using about 20%, a fifth of its revenue to pay down debt. So this is a very complicated scenario. We did hear from Mr. Tony Payan, the executive director and the one who presented this study. Hopefully, we can play some of the points that he made.
A year into 13 months really into her presidency, she insists in sticking to the playbook that she inherited by the president, where the reality is already very different. There's more discontent. The fiscal situation that Mr. López Obrador inherited was fairly healthy, and the economy, though not growing at enormous speeds, 2% or so per year, was a healthy economy. The president comes in 6 years later, now entering her second year, so the 8th year of the fourth transformation of 4T, and clearly she doesn't have the money, she doesn't have the resources, she doesn't have the performing economy, it's flat, practically zero. She's not investing in the kinds of things that guarantee longer-term growth, education, infrastructure, R&D, human development, and things like that. She's not investing in that because the fiscal policy simply is not there. The budget that was just passed, 10.8 billion pesos, I guess commits the country to borrowing another 1.8 billion for 2026. That puts a lot more strain, and that means that a huge portion, close to about 1 out of every 5 pesos in the federal budget, are now going to be to service debt. And then the social transfers that Mr. López Obrador committed, and she's doubling down on, cash transfers for elderly and youth, are also committing another quarter of the federal budget. So there's very little discretionary money to invest in growth. And so I think that the president has not yet understood that she is standing on a very different ground than the one Mr. López Obrador inherited. But for now, she's sticking to the plan. I think 26 will be a very critical year. We'll see a lot more discontent and perhaps the articulation of the opposition.
So there you have it, Rudy. So there's going to be some economic challenges in Mexico. There's also going to be political challenges, and let me explain in depth what Mr. Payan, the point Mr. Payan was making. Some of the changes, some of the benefits, the welfare program, they include raising the minimum wage. When these reforms are done, the minimum wage in Mexico is going to be 4 times what it was in 2017. That's just 8 years ago, and there's nothing attached to this pay raises. People are saying, great, workers are going to be making more, but employers, especially the mid-sized business that Mr. Payan mentioned, are wondering what benefit they're going to be getting. Are they going to be getting extra productivity? No. Are they going to be getting workers that are better trained, that have obtained new skills? No, because that is not contemplated in the budget. Now, there's another aspect that Mr. Payan addressed, and that has to do with public safety. Ms. Sheinbaum has pretty much complied whenever U.S. President Trump has demanded, okay, we want some top-level drug traffickers. There have been 2 surrenders, 2 extraditions or expulsions of Mexican, dozens of Mexican drug traffickers to the U.S. But Ms. Sheinbaum, the current president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, she is very forceful in saying, I will not declare war on the cartels, and in pointing out that this all originates from the desire for drugs, the lust for drugs in the United States. Now, the problem with that the U.S. experts see is that, as proven by the 6 years of her predecessor, Mr. Lopez Obrador's presidency, if you leave the cartels alone, they don't really leave you alone. They continue doing their business, and their business is to sell drugs. Whereas a couple of decades ago, drugs in Mexico were seen as a U.S. problem. Yeah, sure, we have the drug traffickers, but they're sending all the drugs to the U.S. A lot of those drugs now are staying in Mexico. So the way Mr. Payan explains it is, look, they're not nice guys, they're capitalists like everybody else. If you leave them alone, if you don't push back, they're going to expand as much as they can. And we have seen that with the proliferations of numerous drug trafficking organizations that have surfaced all over Mexico. We have seen that in the increased sale and consumption of drugs in Mexico. And we have seen cartels that adjust. When President Trump clamped down on fentanyl, laid down the law on fentanyl, we kind of saw at least a temporary decrease in the fentanyl trafficking. But then we saw an increase in the trafficking of other drugs into the U.S. from Mexico, including heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine. So the bottom line is that in 2026, the U.S.-Mexico relationship still faces very severe challenges, and we'll be keeping an eye out how these challenges play out, and if there's any changes in policy on the part of Mexico or the U.S. that alleviate this coming conflicts.
Yeah, and I do think we have some a soundbite from Mr. Pailan as well on the violence subject. We'll go ahead and play that now.
I think the promise that Mr. Lopez Obrador may have made at that time was essentially hugs, not bullets, abrazos, no balazos, right? So that was the policy, non-confrontation. We're going to leave them alone. It doesn't help him to didn't help him to defeat that narrative that he, we saw that scene where he shook El Chapo Guzman's mom's hand and told her, I got your letter, I'll get back to you, and things like that, little scenes like that sort of hint at these alliances, these tacit alliances. And so I think his policy was essentially, we're not gonna confront the issue of organized crime. The result is that it grew and grew, and it took, I think, not just territory, but more activities, extortion and kidnapping, and then eventually went into extorting money from agricultural producers like in Michoacan, and then eventually derived into smuggling fuel, what is known as huachicol in Mexico. So because they were left alone, and I wrote a piece a long time ago about why crime is not a static force. We often think that crime exists, it's there. But if you don't push back, what happens is that crime just grows. It's a dynamic force. It finds other opportunities, and more people enter the market, the criminal market, and it has its own logic, growth logic. It's at the end of the day, it's capitalism, dark, black markets, but it's capitalism, so it grows.
Yeah, and it's very interesting what you just mentioned about, the Trump administration really cracked down on the fentanyl, and we saw the increase in other drugs being trafficked. And just yesterday, we reported on CBP discovering almost 290 pounds of heroin hidden in one vehicle at the San Ysidro Port of Entry in Southern California. And it is said to be the largest seizure of heroin in a single car here in the U.S. So you kind of see these little things cropping up, these drugs that they used to, have the corner on the market of coming back as they kind of get away from the fentanyl. I did want to ask you about one more thing, and that is the discovery of a smuggling tunnel. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, Rudy. What I can tell you is that yesterday in Juarez, Mexico, right across from us, we saw a lot of movement of Mexican troops, Mexican police, and all the ruckus was about another possible smuggling tunnel that initially they thought they had discovered. There on the screen, you see members of the Mexican Army and the Mexican National Guard go into a hole, basically, on the Mexican levee of the Rio Grande, just right next to the Rio Grande and the U.S. border. It provoked a lot of movement, and after a very extensive investigation that lasted hours, they concluded that, wait a minute, this is not really a smuggling tunnel. It might be used by people. They discovered some clothing right there in that spot, maybe from people who used that hole to hide. But they discovered that it was not a tunnel, that it's a drainage pipe, a storm drainage pipe that originates on the highway and runs for about maybe an eighth of a mile to that spot where they are. Um, but still, there was a lot of speculation, a lot of movement, and certainly it caught international attention. We know that several international news outlets cover this story as well. And the reason is that this structure, this suspicious structure, is just 100 yards from the real smuggling tunnel, very sophisticated underground tunnel that went under the Rio Grande, that was discovered back in January by the U.S. Border Patrol, in which both the American authorities as well as the Mexican authorities have since sealed. And they knew from their investigation back then, they heard rumors of other tunnels. So the search has continued, and yesterday was a close call. But in the end, I spoke to the Border Patrol, and they told me, as far as we're concerned, it was just a false alarm.
Well, it is a positive sight, however, to see, forces on both sides of the border looking for those smuggling tunnels. I don't know, as I haven't been here and reporting on this stuff as long as you have, but I assume that's not really something that you would see, as late as early as 10 years ago. I did want to bring in our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera now. You had something you wanted to add to this?
Just to piggyback on what Julian was saying, yes, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has said it's illegal to declare war on the cartels, that it goes against the Mexican Constitution. It cannot be judge, jury, and executioner. People deserve due process, and she's totally against any sort of war against these cartels. But I do want to mention that in Colombia, how did they get rid of those cartels? So the Medellin and the Cali cartels, the people finally got tired of all the bombings, the murders, the violence, and the government created this hit squads that specifically went after the cartel leaders and their families. And slowly they started basically wiping them out, wiping them off the face of the earth. And eventually the cartels gave in. And for a while, it eliminated the cartel violence, cut down on the drug smuggling coming out of Colombia. Perhaps this is something that Mexico needs to consider if it truly is serious about eliminating the cartels and the violence, the drugs that they bring with them.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add to the conversation, Rudy and Sal, that Mexico did try to take on the cartels back in the mid-2000s. And the results were disastrous. They were not prepared for it. They realized, like Mr. Payan said yesterday, they realized that the cartel shoot back, and they were not prepared for this. Plus, there's always the ever-present threat of corruption. Corruption is a very big generational problem in Mexico. So eventually, some of those highly trained drug fighters who took on the Sinaloa, who took on the Juarez cartel, the Gulf cartel, eventually they switched sides or they formed their own organization. The Zetas cartel, which gained fame for a while during Mexico, was made up of former military. So it's a very complex problem. But like Mr. Payan said, if you leave it alone, it's just going to grow.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both Julian Resendiz, El Paso correspondent, Salvador Rivera, San Diego correspondent. We're going to continue the conversation with Salvador when we come back from the break. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Welcome back to Border Report Live. The Supreme Court is allowing President Donald Trump's administration to enforce a policy blocking transgender and non-binary people from choosing passport sex markers that align with their gender identity. Thursday's decision is Trump's latest win on the High Court's emergency docket and means his Republican administration can enforce the policy while a lawsuit plays out. I did want to bring in Salvador Rivera to talk a little bit about this. Sal, what else can you tell us?
Well, let's start with what began 33 years ago when people were allowed to start changing their gender designation on their passport applications. So if your passport expired and you were renewing it, and now you saw yourself more as a woman than a man, you can simply click off a box and then you could apply for your passport and it would be done just like that. But because of this ruling, the Supreme Court overturned a lower court ruling ending this policy. So now it revives another policy that all new passport applications, people must list their gender assigned at birth. And this pretty much eliminates the possibility that people can do gender updates on their applications or simply go into the non-binary X designation. The court majority wrote that sex at birth on passports no more offends equal protection principles than displaying country at birth, calling it a mere historical fact. But in the dissenting opinion from Justice Ketanji Brown, she wrote, people will face imminent concrete injury if made to travel with documents that contradict their identity. So from now on, Rudy, the State Department can deny new applications that seek to change the gender designation.
And I also wanted to come back to you real quick because there's been a call to overturn, staying on this subject, to overturn the landmark Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage nationwide today for the justices' closed-door conference. Among the new cases, the justices are expected to consider a long-shot appeal from Kim Davis. That's if you may remember her from when she was making headlines a few years back, the former Kentucky court clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples following the court's 2015 ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges. Davis has been trying to get the court to overturn a lower court order for her to pay $360,000 in damages in attorney's fees to a couple whom she denied a marriage license. Clarence Thomas is the only justice to call for erasing that same-sex marriage ruling.
So Justice Thomas and the others are now considering taking up the issue, and they might decide on whether to consider changing this policy beginning next week. So this could have huge implications. As you mentioned, this has been the law for 10 years. Same-sex marriages have been allowed. And but again, the Supreme Court is now pondering reversing this decision. But keep in mind, if the court does eventually overturn same-sex marriage, same-sex marriages could still be protected because in 2022, President Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act, protecting same-sex and interracial marriages at the federal level. So even if the Supreme Court overturns this decision, there are still federal protections in place for people of same-sex marriages and interracial marriages here in the United States.
And for us Texas residents, us Texans, it's an interesting subject right now as well, because in the last week, the state Supreme Court actually said that judges and justices of the peace within the state of Texas no longer have to perform these same-sex marriages if it violates their personal religious beliefs, which of course experts all across the country that are reacting to that are saying that's going to go to the Supreme Court level as well. So it seems like whether or not the Supreme Court takes up this case, they're in for a long battle over this as things develop, especially with this new ruling from our state Supreme Court here in the state of Texas. Thank you for joining me today, Salvador Rivera, our San Diego correspondent. Stay with us because Border Report Live, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in 1 minute. Welcome back. We've got some new hot polling from Emerson College to share with you regarding the president's approval rating. Now, a new Emerson College poll national survey finds 41% of voters approve of the job President Trump is doing in office, while 49% disapprove. Now, this is a 4-point drop in approval from 45 in October, while the president's disapproval increased 1 point from 48 to 49%. Quote, nearly 1 year after he was elected, President Trump's approval has flipped since the first Emerson College poll of the new administration. That's from Spencer Kimball, the executive director of Emerson College Polling. He said since his inauguration, Trump has lost support among key groups. Republican voters' approval decreased 12 points from 91% to 79%, and his disapproval intensified among independent voters from 44% to 51%, and Hispanics from 39% now up to 54%. And again, I just mentioned Spencer Kimball, and pretty apt timing because we don't want you to forget about our partners at Political Power Ranker. It's a show weekly that tracks the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nexstar's director of political content, Chris Bergen, the director of Emerson College Polling, who we just mentioned, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. This week's episode focused on exactly that. We're working on last week's episode yesterday, and this was one of the polls that made it into that episode. So if you want the hottest polling data on anything involving politics, from the border, economics, trade, to the president and other politicians' approval rating, check them out at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. That is going to do it for us today. For Salvador in San Diego, Julian in El Paso, my name is Rudy Mireles in Harlingen. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.